December 1944. Campshanks, New York. In the cold barracks of a POW camp just outside New York City, German officers lived in a strange limbo between defeat and defiance. They still wore their ranks, they still saluted, and they still believed that somehow Germany would find a way to win. Among them, the P-47 Thunderbolt had become a symbol of hatred, the heavy fighter that ruled the skies over Europe, destroying their supply lines, their airfields, their hope. They cursed it in whispers. They blamed it for their capture. But none of them truly understood what they were up against. Not yet. Among these men was General Major Klaus Brenner, 52 years old, a veteran of 2 wars. His uniform still bore the Iron Cross, though it meant nothing here. He carried himself with rigid dignity, refusing to show weakness in front of his captors or his men. But inside, Klaus carried a weight that no medal could honor. His son, Lucas, had been lost 3 months earlier during a bombing run over France. No body, no confirmation, just silence. The Americans had been watching Klaus closely. They knew his reputation, strategic mind, loyal to the Wehrmacht, but not a fanatic. And now they had plans for him. This story reaches across oceans and decades, connecting past to present in ways you might not expect. Before we continue, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. We read every single one, and it reminds us how history connects us all, no matter where we are. When the camp commandant summoned Klaus to his office that December morning, the general assumed it was another interrogation. He'd endured dozens. He had nothing left to say. "Sit down, General Brenner," the commandant said in careful German. His name was Colonel Warren Mitchell, a man in his 40s with tired eyes. Klaus remained standing. "I prefer not to." "Suit yourself." Mitchell slid a folder across his desk. "We're taking you on a trip tomorrow, you and 5 other senior officers." "A trip?" Klaus's jaw tightened. "Where?" "Long Island. Republic Aviation Factory." And the name meant nothing to Klaus, but Mitchell's expression suggested it should. "What is this facility?" "You'll see." Mitchell leaned back in his chair. "Consider it educational. We think it's time you and your colleagues understood certain realities about this war." "I understand perfectly well," Klaus said coldly. "You have numbers, we have skill." Mitchell almost smiled. "Numbers, yes. Let's talk about numbers tomorrow." That night, Klaus lay awake on his bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling. Around him, other officers snored or whispered in the darkness. His mind kept circling back to Lucas. His son had been 23, a Luftwaffe pilot, idealistic and brave. Too brave. Klaus had tried to teach him caution, but young men don't listen during war. They think courage is enough. "Brenner." A voice interrupted his thoughts. Klaus turned his head. In the next bunk, Oberst Dieter Schaffer, a hardened officer from the Eastern Front, was watching him. "You heard about the trip?" "Yes." "What do you think they want?" "To humiliate us," Klaus said flatly. "To show us their factories, their wealth. Propaganda." Dieter was quiet for a moment. "My intelligence contact before capture mentioned something. American aircraft production numbers. He said they were impossible. Thousands per month." He paused. "I didn't believe him." Klaus didn't respond. He didn't want to believe it either. The next morning, they were loaded into a military truck. 6 German generals, handcuffed and guarded by armed soldiers. The December cold bit through their uniforms as they traveled east through Long Island. Klaus watched the landscape pass. Suburban homes, children playing, cars on roads, normalcy. No bomb craters, no ruins. It was almost obscene. "Look at them," muttered General Major Ernst Vogel, sitting across from Klaus. "They don't even know there's a war." "That's because the war hasn't touched them," Dieter said quietly. "Not here." After an hour, the truck slowed. Through the canvas opening, Klaus saw it. A massive industrial complex stretching across acres of land. Republic Aviation Corporation. Smokestacks, rail lines, endless buildings, and the sound, even from outside, a deep mechanical roar of production. The truck stopped. Guards opened the canvas. "Gentlemen," Colonel Mitchell said, standing beside the truck, "welcome to Farmingdale. This is where we build the P-47 Thunderbolt, the plane you've come to know so well in Europe." He gestured toward the factory entrance. "Shall we?" Klaus's heart was pounding as they were led through security checkpoints and into the main assembly building. And then he saw it. The factory floor stretched before them like a metal cathedral, hundreds of yards long, filled with assembly lines, workers, machinery, noise, and planes. Dozens of P-47s in various stages of construction, lined up in perfect rows. But it wasn't the planes that made Klaus's breath catch. It was the speed. Workers moved with mechanical precision. Parts flowed like water. A fuselage here, wings there, engines being mounted, canopies fitted. Everywhere he looked, Thunderbolts were being born. "We produce one P-47 every 63 minutes, Mitchell said calmly, walking beside the group. "On this floor alone. We have 3 such floors, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week." Klaus felt the blood drain from his face. 1 per hour. From one factory. Beside him, Ernst had gone completely pale. "Unmöglich," he whispered. "Impossible." "How many factories like this?" Dieter asked, his voice hoarse. Mitchell turned to face them. "For the P-47, just this one. But we have similar facilities for B-17s, B-24s, P-51s, transports, trainers, Consolidated Aircraft in Texas, Boeing in Seattle, Douglas in California, North American in Kansas, Bell in Buffalo." He paused, letting it sink in. "In 1944 alone, the United States will produce approximately 96,000 aircraft." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Klaus stared at the assembly line, watching another completed Thunderbolt being towed toward the testing area. Somewhere in his mind, he was calculating. Germany's entire production for 1944 would barely reach 40,000 planes, and most of those were replacements for losses. These Americans were building an air force that couldn't be stopped. That could never be stopped. "This is what killed my son," Klaus thought suddenly. Not skill, not courage, not fate. Mathematics. Mitchell led them deeper into the factory, past the assembly lines to a testing area where completed P-47s sat gleaming under industrial lights. Their massive radial engines, their heavy armor, their 8 machine guns. Klaus had read the intelligence reports, but seeing them here, fresh and endless, was different. "Would any of you like to sit in the cockpit?" Mitchell asked. The question was met with frozen silence. To touch the enemy's weapon, to sit where American pilots sat before they flew over Germany. "I will," Klaus heard himself say. The other generals stared at him, shocked. Dieter's expression was unreadable. Mitchell nodded to a guard who brought a ladder. Klaus climbed slowly, his handcuffs clinking against the metal. He settled into the cockpit, and despite everything, his military mind engaged. The instrument panel was sophisticated but practical. The stick was heavy. The visibility was excellent. This was a machine built by people who understood war and understood production. "What do you think, General?" Mitchell called up. Klaus looked down at the American colonel. "I think you've already won," he said quietly. "You just haven't realized it yet." Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "We realized it 2 years ago. That's why we built these factories." As Klaus climbed down, he felt the eyes of his fellow officers burning into him. Betrayer, they would think. Defeatist. But Klaus was neither. He was simply a man who had spent 40 years in military service, and he knew logistics, he knew numbers, and the numbers here were apocalyptic. They were led to an observation platform overlooking the entire production floor. From here, the scale was even more overwhelming. Workers, thousands of them, men and women, black and white, young and old, moved in orchestrated chaos. Klaus noticed something else. Many of the workers were women, wearing coveralls and welding masks, operating heavy machinery with practiced ease. "Your women build weapons," Ernst said, his tone somewhere between disgust and disbelief. "Our women build everything," Mitchell corrected. While our men fight overseas, they keep the factories running. Last month, this facility alone employed 12,000 workers, 40% are women. Klaus thought of Germany, of the restrictions, the traditional roles, the wasted potential. Here was another advantage he'd never considered. "There's something I need to understand," Dieter said suddenly, his voice cutting through the factory noise. "Why show us this? Why bring us here? You've won, as Brenner says. What purpose does this serve?" Mitchell turned to face the group fully. "Because some of you will survive this war. You'll go home eventually, and when you do, you'll tell people what you saw here. You'll tell them about American production, American resolve, American capacity." He paused. "Maybe it will help prevent another war 30 years from now." The words settled over them like snow. Klaus watched another P-47 being rolled off the line. He thought of Lucas again, his son's last letter, written 3 weeks before he disappeared. "We're holding them back, Father. Every day we hold them back." But they hadn't been holding anything back. They'd been drowning in a tide of metal and oil and American industrial might. "I have a question," Klaus said quietly. Mitchell nodded. "How many of these planes have been lost in combat? Total?" Mitchell consulted with an aide, then returned. "Through November, approximately 3,000 P-47s have been lost in all theaters. Combat, accidents, mechanical failure, everything." Klaus did the math instantly. "And you've produced 15,436 as of last week." The ratio was staggering. For every P-47 shot down, America built 5 more, maybe 6. Germany could destroy them faster than any air force in history, and it wouldn't matter. "Gentlemen," Mitchell said, checking his watch, "we're going to take you to the canteen. The workers are on lunch break. You'll eat with them." This was somehow worse than the factory floor. They were led into a massive cafeteria filled with hundreds of workers, laughing and talking, eating hot food from trays. The noise was deafening, not from machines but from life. Normal life. American life. Untouched by bombing or starvation or desperation. The German officers sat at a separate table, still handcuffed, still guarded, but visible to everyone. Klaus felt the stares, curious, hostile, pitying. An older black man in coveralls made eye contact with him for a long moment. Klaus couldn't read the expression. Was it anger, satisfaction, understanding? A young woman, maybe 25, with her hair tied back in a red scarf, approached their table carefully. She carried a tray of sandwiches. "Colonel Mitchell said you might be hungry," she said in halting German. The accent was terrible, but the gesture froze Klaus. She was offering them food, them, the enemy. "Thank you," Klaus said in English. She nodded and set the tray down, then hesitated. "My brother flies P-47s over Germany." She met Klaus's eyes. "He's 22. Klaus felt something break inside his chest, the same age as Lucas. "I hope he comes home safely," he said, and meant it. She studied his face for a long moment, then walked away. Ernst grabbed a sandwich angrily. "This is psychological warfare," he muttered. "They're trying to break us." "They don't need to break us," Dieter said quietly, staring at his untouched food. "We're already broken. We just didn't know it until today." That evening, back at the camp, Klaus sat alone in the corner of the barracks, while the other officers argued in heated whispers. Some called him a traitor for sitting in the P-47. Others were simply silent, processing what they'd seen. The camp felt different now, smaller, more fragile, like a bubble about to burst. Klaus pulled out the only possession he'd been allowed to keep. A small photograph of Lucas in his Luftwaffe uniform, smiling with the invincible confidence of youth. "You never had a chance." Klaus whispered to the photograph. "None of you did." "Brenner." It was Dieter approaching slowly. "Can I sit?" Klaus nodded. Dieter sat heavily on the bunk beside him. For a long time neither spoke. Finally Dieter said, "I'm going to write a report for after the war about what we saw today. Someone needs to document it." "They'll call you a defeatist," Klaus said. "I know." Dieter looked at him. But someone needs to tell the truth. That we didn't lose because we weren't brave enough or skilled enough. We lost because we picked a fight with a country that could build a P-47 every hour. Klaus studied the other man's face. You're risking everything. The SS men here, the hardliners, they'll make your life hell. Probably. Dieter stood. But I'm tired of lies, Klaus. Aren't you? Before Klaus could answer, the barracks door banged open. 3 officers stormed in, led by SS Brigadeführer Otto Reinhardt, a fanatic who'd been captured in France. His eyes were blazing. Traitors! Reinhardt hissed, pointing at Klaus and Dieter. You sat in their plane. You ate their food. You smiled at their workers. Klaus rose slowly to his feet. I did what I was ordered to do. You collaborated! Reinhardt stepped closer. Around them, other officers were watching nervously. You're helping the Americans demoralize us, spreading defeatism. The Führer would have you shot. The Führer, Klaus said coldly, is not here. And if he saw what we saw today, he'd realize this war is already over. Reinhardt's hand shot out and grabbed Klaus by the collar. Take it back. For a moment, violence hung in the air. Then Colonel Mitchell's voice cut through the tension. Gentlemen, step away from each other, now. American guards flooded into the barracks, rifles ready. Reinhardt released Klaus slowly, his face twisted with rage. Mitchell's eyes moved between them. General Brenner, you're being moved to different quarters. Tonight. Why? Klaus demanded. Because I need you alive, Mitchell said quietly. And staying here isn't safe. As guards escorted Klaus out of the barracks, he glanced back at Dieter, who nodded once. A silent understanding passed between them. The truth was dangerous, but silence was worse. And somewhere in Klaus's mind a question was forming, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. If he'd known the truth about American production capacity in 1939, would he have spoken up? Would he have tried to stop the war before it started? Or would he have stayed silent like so many others until it was far too late? Or Klaus's new quarters were in the officers' isolation wing, a small room with a cot, a desk, and a single barred window overlooking the camp perimeter. It was technically safer, but it felt like a cell. He was being separated, protected, or perhaps quarantined, like a disease that might spread. The first night alone, Klaus couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the factory floor, the endless assembly lines, the workers' faces, the mathematics of annihilation. He'd spent his entire career studying logistics, supply chains, production capacity. How had German intelligence failed so catastrophically? How had none of them understood what America was capable of? The answer, he realized, was simple. They hadn't wanted to know. At dawn, there was a knock on his door. A guard entered, followed by Colonel Mitchell, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder. "May I?" Mitchell gestured to the chair. Klaus, sitting on his cot, nodded wearily. Mitchell set 1 coffee on the desk, close enough for Klaus to reach, then sat down. "I wanted to check on you. Last night was unfortunate." "It was inevitable," Klaus said. "You put us in an impossible position. Show us the truth, then expect us not to react." "Actually, I expected exactly what happened." Mitchell opened the folder. "Brigadeführer Reinhardt has been transferred to a different facility. Stricter security. He and 17 others, all SS or hardline Nazis, are being separated from regular Wehrmacht officers." Klaus picked up the coffee, surprised it was still hot. "Why tell me this?" "Because you and officers like you, Schaefer, Vogel, a few others, are different. You're soldiers, not fanatics. And frankly, we need you." "Need us?" Klaus almost laughed. "For what? The war is over, as I said yesterday." "Not in the Pacific," Mitchell said quietly. "Not yet. And not in Germany, where Hitler will fight until Berlin is rubble." He leaned forward. "But after, when the shooting stops, we're going to need Germans who can help rebuild, who can testify to the truth, who can help their country move forward instead of backward." Klaus stared at him. "You want me to collaborate?" "I want you to survive," Mitchell corrected, "and to remember what you saw. Because 20 years from now, there will be people in Germany who claim none of this ever happened, who say the numbers were exaggerated, who insist Germany could have won if only... He stopped. You know the stories people tell themselves after they lose. Klaus did know. He'd heard them after the First World War. The stab-in-the-back myth, the betrayals, the excuses, never the simple truth. We lost because we were outmatched. What do you want from me? Klaus asked quietly. Mitchell pulled a document from the folder. I want you to write down everything you saw yesterday. Technical observations, production estimates. Your professional assessment as a general officer. We'll keep it classified now, but eventually it will become part of the historical record. And if I refuse, then you stay in this room for the rest of the war, and nobody hears your voice. Mitchell stood. Think about it. I'll come back tomorrow. After Mitchell left, Klaus sat with the blank paper for hours. His hand hovered over the pen. Writing this report would be a betrayal, of Germany, of the Wehrmacht, of everything he'd fought for. But saying nothing would be a different kind of betrayal. Of truth, of his son's memory, of the thousands who died believing they were fighting a war they could win. He thought about Lucas again. His son had believed in courage, in skill, in the righteousness of their cause. He'd never known that while he was risking his life in the skies over France, America was stamping out P-47s like clockwork. He'd died believing the fight was even. Klaus picked up the pen and began to write. December 15th, 1944. I witnessed the Republic Aviation Production Facility on Long Island. What follows is my professional assessment as a general officer of the Wehrmacht. The words came slowly at first, then faster. He described the assembly lines, the workers, the terrifying efficiency. He estimated production rates, calculated replacement ratios, projected air superiority timelines. With each sentence, he felt something inside him shift. Not loyalty to America, but a different kind of loyalty. To facts, to reality, to the soldiers who deserved to know the truth. 3 hours later, he'd filled 7 pages. He set down the pen, exhausted, and stared at what he'd written. This document would outlive him. It would be read by historians, by students, by Germans trying to understand how they'd lost the war. Would they see him as a traitor, a realist, a coward? He didn't know. He only knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. The guard entered with a message. General Brenner, you have a visitor. Colonel Mitchell approved it. Klaus frowned. Who? Says his name is Hauptmann Werner Vogel. Claims to be your nephew. The name hit Klaus like a physical blow. Werner, his sister's son. He'd heard Werner had been captured somewhere in Belgium, but he'd had no idea the young man was here, in this camp. Send him in, Klaus said, his voice unsteady. The door opened, and Werner stepped inside, 26 years old, thin from captivity, but still standing straight, his Luftwaffe uniform worn but clean. For a moment, uncle and nephew simply stared at each other. Then Werner crossed the room and embraced Klaus tightly. Uncle Klaus, thank God you're alive. Klaus returned the embrace, fighting unexpected emotion. Werner, when did they bring you here? 2 weeks ago. I didn't know you were here until yesterday. After the incident with Reinhardt, word spread. Werner stepped back, studying Klaus's face. They say you sat in a P-47, that you told the Americans we've already lost. Here it was. The judgment. Klaus braced himself, but Werner surprised him. Tell me it's true, he said quietly. Tell me there's a reason Lucas and I and everyone we knew threw ourselves against the sky and couldn't stop them. Tell me it wasn't just incompetence or cowardice. Tell me there was something real we couldn't overcome. Klaus gestured to the desk, to the pages he'd written. I'll tell you everything, he said. But first I need to know, are you ready to hear the truth? Werner looked at the papers, then back at his uncle. I've been ready since the day I was shot down, he said. The lies are what I can't survive anymore. Klaus nodded slowly. Then sit down, Werner, and I'll tell you what I saw. Subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from World War II. These histories deserve to be remembered, and we need your support to keep bringing them to light. Hit that subscribe button and share this video with anyone who values historical truth. Werner sat on the edge of the cot while Klaus spoke, laying out everything from the previous day. The factory floor, the production numbers, the workers, the mathematics that couldn't be argued with. As he talked, Klaus watched his nephew's face transform. Shock giving way to understanding, understanding to something like grief. When Klaus finished, Werner was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "All those missions, all those friends we lost. We thought we were holding the line." "You were," Klaus said firmly. "You fought with skill and courage, but courage doesn't stop an assembly line that never sleeps." Werner laughed bitterly. "Do you know what the hardest part is? It's the relief. I feel relieved, Uncle Klaus, because now I know we couldn't have won. It wasn't our fault. We were doomed from the start." He looked up. "Is that cowardice?" "No," Klaus said. "It's clarity, and clarity is the rarest thing in war." Werner gestured to the papers on the desk. "What is this?" "A report. For the Americans. Colonel Mitchell asked me to document what I saw. Will you do it?" Klaus had been asking himself the same question all morning. Now, looking at Werner, at this young man who'd survived when Lucas hadn't, the answer became clear. "Yes," Klaus said, "because someone needs to tell the next generation what really happened, before the myths take hold." Werner nodded slowly. "Then I'll help you. I can add my perspective. A pilot's view. What it was like in the air when the Thunderbolts came." He paused. "Lucas would want the truth told, Uncle Klaus. You know he would." The mention of Lucas's name brought a sharp pain to Klaus's chest. "I don't know what Lucas would want," he admitted. "I don't know if he believed in the cause, or if he was just following orders like the rest of us." "He believed in you," Werner said quietly. "In his last letter to me, 3 days before he disappeared, he wrote, 'Whatever happens, I'm glad my father taught me to think for myself. That's the one gift that matters.'" Klaus turned away, overwhelmed. He hadn't known about that letter, hadn't known Lucas felt that way. "Help me finish this," Klaus said, his voice rough. "Help me make sure their deaths meant something, even if that meaning is just a warning for the future." Werner extended his hand. "I will." They spent the next 2 days writing together, uncle and nephew, general and captain, filling page after page with observations, calculations, testimonies. Werner described aerial combat from a pilot's perspective, the hopelessness of facing endless waves of P-47s, the exhaustion, the mechanical failures from overuse, the shortage of fuel and ammunition. Klaus provided the strategic context, the supply chain failures, the production gaps that had been obvious to any trained logistician but ignored by leadership. On the 3rd day, Colonel Mitchell returned to collect the report. He read through it carefully, his expression unreadable. "This is good work," Mitchell said finally. "Honest, detailed, exactly what we needed." "What will you do with it?" Klaus asked. "Right now, file it classified. But after the war ends, it'll be declassified. Historians will use it. Your countrymen will read it." Mitchell looked at both men. "You've done something important here. You've created a primary source document that can't be dismissed or distorted." Werner shifted uncomfortably. "The others, the officers in the main camp, they'll see us as traitors." "Probably," Mitchell acknowledged. "That's the price of telling uncomfortable truths. But years from now, when Germany is rebuilding, someone will find this document and realize you had the courage to face reality. That matters more than temporary judgment." After Mitchell left, Klaus and Werner sat in silence. Finally, Werner said, "What do we do now?" "We survive," Klaus said. "We wait for the war to end, and then we go home and try to help our country face what actually happened instead of inventing comfortable lies. And if no one listens?" Klaus thought about the factory floor, the endless assembly lines, the young woman whose brother flew P-47s. Someone will listen, eventually. The truth has a way of surviving. That night, Klaus dreamed of Lucas. In the dream, his son was sitting in the cockpit of a P-47, smiling that reckless smile. "You finally understand, Father," Dream Lucas said. "It was never about being brave enough or good enough. It was about the machine, and they built a bigger machine." Klaus woke up with tears on his face. The next morning, an alarm sounded through the camp, 3 sharp blasts that meant an assembly was called. Klaus and Werner were escorted to the main yard, where hundreds of German POWs stood in formation, surrounded by armed guards. Colonel Mitchell stood on a platform, a radio beside him. "Gentlemen," Mitchell announced in German, "we have news from the front." This morning, December 16th, German forces launched a major offensive in the Ardennes forest, a counterattack involving multiple panzer divisions and over 200,000 troops. A murmur ran through the assembled prisoners. Hope, sudden, desperate hope, lighting faces that had been dark with resignation. Klaus felt his stomach drop. No, not another offensive. Not after everything they'd learned. The attack achieved initial success through surprise and weather conditions, Mitchell continued. However, the weather is clearing, and as of this morning, the U.S. Army Air Forces have begun operations in support of ground forces. He turned on the radio. Static crackled, then a voice came through, an American radio dispatch. Thunderbolts and Mustangs hitting German columns along the entire front. 9th Air Force reporting over 400 sorties since dawn. Enemy armor sustaining heavy losses. Klaus watched the hope drain from the faces around him. They were hearing it in real time. The sound of the machine they'd seen at Republic Aviation, now deployed over the Ardennes, destroying their countrymen's last gamble. Beside him, Werner whispered, "It doesn't matter how brave they are. The planes will come. They always come." And Klaus understood, finally, the full weight of what they'd witnessed at that factory. It wasn't just about production numbers or industrial capacity. It was about the inevitability of defeat. Germany had gambled on a war of skill and courage, and America had answered with a war of mathematics and steel. The dream of German victory, the dream that kept these men standing straight despite captivity, despite everything, was dying in real time. Broadcast over a radio in a POW camp in New York. And the most terrifying part? The Americans weren't even celebrating. Mitchell's face showed no triumph, only tired certainty, because they'd known this would happen. They'd known it the moment they'd started building P-47s by the thousand. Klaus looked around at his fellow prisoners, at their crumbling hope, their dawning realization, and wondered how many of them would survive this moment. Not physically, emotionally. How many would make it through the psychological collapse of everything they'd believed? And in his pocket, folded carefully, was the photograph of Lucas. Klaus touched it gently, like a talisman against despair. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," he whispered, "but I can tell your story. The real story. That has to be enough." Around him, the camp had gone completely silent, not the silence of defiance or dignity, the silence of men finally understanding the war was over, and had been over long before any of them realized. April 1945. The end was close now. Klaus received a letter, forwarded through Red Cross channels, miraculously intact after months of chaos. He recognized his wife's handwriting immediately, though it trembled more than he remembered. "Klaus," it began, "I don't know if this will reach you. I don't even know if you're alive. But I need to tell you, Lucas's squadron commander visited. He told me what happened that day over France. Our son's plane was hit by a P-47. He tried to bail out. The parachute didn't open." Klaus's hands shook as he continued reading. "But Klaus, the commander said something else. He said Lucas radioed before he went down. His last words were, 'Tell my father he was right about everything.'" Klaus set the letter down carefully, precisely as if it might shatter. Werner, who'd been sitting across from him, looked up. "Uncle?" "He knew," Klaus whispered. At the end, Lucas understood. Werner moved closer, reading the letter over Klaus's shoulder. "Then your report wasn't just for history, it was for him." In May, when news of Germany's surrender reached the camp, there was no celebration among the prisoners, no outrage either, just exhausted acceptance. Klaus stood in the yard with Werner and Dieter, watching American flags rise over the camp, and felt nothing but profound weariness. "What now?" Dieter asked. "Now we go home," Klaus said, "and we rebuild." With the truth? Klaus thought of the Republic Aviation Factory, of the P-47s rolling off the line every hour, of his son's final words, of the young American woman whose brother was 22. With the truth, he confirmed, no matter how hard that is. Years later, Klaus Brenner's report would be declassified and published. Historians would cite it. Students would study it. Germans would argue about it. But it would survive. A primary document from a man who'd seen the machine up close and understood that wars aren't won by courage alone. And somewhere in the archives, preserved forever, were Klaus's final words in that report. "We didn't lose because we weren't brave enough. We lost because we fought a nation that turned bravery into mathematics and mathematics into mountains of steel." The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't just a weapon. It was proof that modern war is won in factories, not battlefields. May future generations remember this lesson and choose peace over the machinery of death. Before you go, if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. History's lessons are only valuable if we pass them forward. Thank you for watching.